Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to the new series of Global Policy Dialogues exploring the future of the world, organised by the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA, and the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, with the support of the UN Peace and Development Trust Fund. Thank you for tuning in from wherever you are to follow today's discussions on the future of work. My name is Aminda Lee. I'm a British-Italian journalist and moderator, and I'm logged in today from Rome, where the weather is pretty cloudy today. I'm honoured to be your moderator for this and other discussions in this important series of global policy dialogues on preparing for what's next. The aim is to share insights and experiences to reduce the risks and make our future systems more resilient, and to also help that the world will be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. UNDESA has launched a series of Future of World policy briefs connected to this series. A paper on harnessing longevity in the future of work is now available for you to read at un.org/DESA. This link will also be posted in the Zoom chat and on the Facebook page. For this first dialogue, we have a great 90-minute programme with many excellent speakers who will discuss the latest developments in economic security, informal work, the gig economy, and automation. I'm going to explain how today's panel and discussion will work in a moment, but first I have a few logistical announcements. English captions are available in Zoom and Facebook by clicking on the captioning icon in the bottom of the screen. Live captions are also available in the 6 official languages of the UN, so that means Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian and Spanish, and they are available on a separate website. You can see the link on the bottom right hand of your screen how to get there. It's bit.ly/captions15sept. That should be quite easy, and it's all, of course, case sensitive. That will be remaining on your screen so you can always see it here. On that website, you will find a drop-down menu to select your language. And you may have noticed that the event is also being provided in American Sign Language today. We are using the hashtag Future of the World for this event and actually for the whole series. So please do share your thoughts on social media using this hashtag, which is again displayed at the bottom of your screens. UNDESA has been organising its Global Policy Dialogue series for a year now, and based on your feedback, we are upping the interactivity for this event. So we're conducting several polls today using a tool called Slido. You can access the system through the QR code you can see on the bottom of your screen, or by going to slido.com and logging in using the same Future of the World hashtag. Again, it's case sensitive. The hashtag, remember, is at the bottom of the screen. You're also encouraged to send in questions during this event via Slido tool. It's very easy. When you log in, you can see there's a polls tab and a Q&A tab. And you will notice that there are already some questions in there. We've not made them up. These are ones that you've sent in during the registration. And you can vote on people's questions too. It's very simple. You just click vote on it. And I will be trying to go to the ones with the highest number of votes first. Now, you've heard that I'm logging in from Rome, but we'd like to know where you're watching us from. So let's launch the first poll of this session. And I can see that we've already have some answers coming in here. So it's very easy. You just click, write in your reply, and then press send. So I'm just doing it myself. So we'll leave that open for a little bit, and then we will see how many people are logging in and where they're from. At the moment, Rome seems to be the top one. I'm sure there are many people from elsewhere around the world. So I'm going to leave that poll open. Keep in sending your messages and was to tell us where you're from. And before we dive into today's topic on the future of work, we have, of course, some words of welcome in a video message from UN Under Secretary General Liu Zhenmin, the head of UNDESA.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first session of the Global Policy Dialogues under the overarching theme, Future of the World. Organized by UNDESA in partnership with UNDP, these dialogues will take place over the coming months and bring together global experts on some of the most pressing issues of our time. In their discussions, participants will consider ways to reduce risks and make our future systems more resilient. Each one of you is a critical part of this series. Today's topic is the future of work. Additional topics in the series will cover our communities, the economy, our planet, trust in government, and aging. I invite you to actively participate and ask questions using the chat features. After all, we cannot achieve the Sustainable Development Goals without you. Thank you for participating in this session. I hope you will continue to engage with us throughout.
Thank you. That was a very useful introduction to the whole of this series. And as Lou Zemin said, you all have an important part to play in these discussions, which is why there will be plenty of interaction throughout this session. Now let's hear from the other organizer of this series in a video from the UNDP Under Secretary General and Associate Administrator, Usha Rao Monarari.
Good morning. UNDP is honored to co-host, together with UNDESA, the groundbreaking Future of the World series. The Global Policy Dialogues will bring together experts and practitioners from a variety of domains and industries to exchange insights and ideas on how to make our systems more resilient now and in the future. The inaugural session is dedicated to the future of work and will inquire into the configuration of the future global workforce, as well as the skills and competencies required to meet future employment demands. The digital transformation accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic made access to technology and the ability to use, create, and shape it fundamental to economic power and potential. Pandemic conditions gave impetus to a rapidly transforming labor market in which 90% of future jobs will require digital skills. At the same time, the pandemic laid bare the deep impacts of inequality. UNDP is committed to prioritize those most left behind, with increased focus on informal, self-employed, domestic and unpaid care workers, people with disabilities, as well as migrant and internally displaced persons. We stand ready to work with our partners on this agenda of transformational change, helping partners rethink development trajectories and generate new capacities for a post-pandemic recovery founded on the resilience of communities and ecosystems. We welcome your participation to this event to imagine an equitable and just future of work. Thank you.
And we will certainly be discussing the very many transformational changes in the labour market and exploring how to overcome the challenges to creating that equitable and just future for work. Now, let's close the first poll and see the word cloud of all the locations that you've shared with us today. Can I see the word cloud on the screen, please? So we have had 43 people who've been replying so far. At least that's on mine, but it seems like there are many more in the overall thing. And we have a lot of people, obviously, from New York, a big representation from England and Rome, but we do have many other places too. We have Venezuela, India, Nairobi, we have Singapore, Sweden, Hong Kong. So it's great that so many of you are actually joining us today. That's really wonderful, and I hope that you will find the discussions useful. Now, as we've just heard, today's focus is on the world of work, which is currently undergoing huge changes caused by digital developments, the introduction of AI and robots, and of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, among other things. But what do you feel about these changes? And now I would like to launch another quick poll, just so we can keep that running in the background and see what you think. And this time, the question is, do you think the world is prepared for the future of work? Good question. And you have various options there, so please vote, and we'll keep that in the background and let the voting continue for a moment while I explain how this session is going to run. We're going to focus on 3 specific topics relating to the world of work, and then there'll be a final, more general discussion around the policies needed to support workers. Please send in your questions as each of the topic is being discussed, and the panelists will be ready there and then to answer. We'll also conclude with a round of quick-fire questions in subjects that may not have been touched on earlier. Now, can I stop the current poll, and can we see the results, please? We'll see if see if the world is prepared for the world of work, for the future of the world of work. Can we see that nice and big? Thank you very much indeed. And most people are saying not ready. That's over 46%. So that's a lot of people think that we've got more to do. And also we're going to have to work hard on that, and then we're going to hear some of the solutions maybe that are going to help us be ready. So to make this session even more interactive, we are going to ask you to choose the order of the 3 topics we want to discuss. So I'm going to launch the next poll, and here it is. Which topic are you most interested in? And we're going to go to the one first, which has the highest votes. So you can vote on economic insecurity, informal work and the gig economy, and the role of AI and automation. Keep voting on that. We want to hear as many people as possible. And while you're voting on that, I'm now going to introduce the speakers who are going to be intervening in the various topics. So we are being joined by, here are our panelists on the screen. We have Elliot Harris, who is Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development and Chief Economist at UNDESA. We say hello. We have Luis Felipe Lopez Carvala, who is Assistant Secretary General, Assistant Administrator, and Director of the Regional Bureau for Latin America and the Caribbean at UNDP.
Thank you, Aminda. Great to be here.
Thank you. We have Agostina Morni, who is Senior Advisor at the International Organization of Employers. Say hello.
Hello.
Okay, we have Saul Gomez, who is a driver in the gig economy and founder of Ni un reparto menos, which means not one delivery worker less. It's an advocacy group for the rights of delivery workers in Mexico City. And he's actually with Jessica Corral, who's going to help with the translation. Please say hello. Thank you. And we have Uma Rani, who is Senior Economist at the International Labour Organization. Say hi.
Hello. Hello. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Lindsay Sanneman, who's a PhD candidate and member of the Interactive Robotics Group at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. So we have say hello.
Hello, great to be here.
Okay, we have a great team with us. We will be hearing from them in the different topics. And when I'm coming to them, I'll be using their first names just to keep the discussions a bit more nimble. So I've introduced our panelists. I'm going to close the Slido poll and let's see what topic the audience would like to hear about first. And it is, and if we can see it nice and full screen, informal work and the gig economy is number 1. And then we'll go to AI, and then we'll go to economic insecurity. So informal work and the gig economy. This, of course, ties into Sustainable Development Goal number 8, which is to promote sustained, inclusive and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment and decent work for all. And that includes those securing safe and securing work environments for all workers, including those in precarious employment. Now, the world of informal work is very varied, including people who have little or no job security, usually paid low wages with few benefits. Common categories of informal work include jobs in restaurants and hotels, janitors, security guards, construction workers, piece rate workers in sweatshops, agricultural workers and temporary office workers. And of course, it can also include informal renting and selling activities. Whereas the gig economy is said to be the end of the concept of a job for life. In this model, people work as freelancers in short-term jobs for more than one company. They too have little employment security and limited access to social protection, much like workers in the informal work economy. Before we start discussions, let's see what you think about this topic with the next poll. So we'd like to now let's start the next poll, please. And you can see it coming up. How secure do you feel in your job? And you have various options there. I'm going to leave those, leave the poll open. And now we're going to just introduce the guests we're going to be hearing from in this discussion. I'm joined by Tina from the International Organization of Employers, who has expertise in the future of work, gender equality, and diversity, among other things. We have Saul, the gig economy worker from Mexico City, and Jessica, who will be providing translation. And we have Uma from the International Labour Organization, who is lead author of the World Employment and Social Outlook Report. The 2021 edition, published in June, looks at the role of digital labour platforms. She'll be telling us more about that soon. But first, let's see what you voted in the poll. I'm going to close the voting and let's see the results. So, so the majority of people feel fairly secure. I think that says fairly secure. And then very secure. If we could have it, yes, that's right, I can see it full screen. So the majority of people seem fairly secure. That's interesting. I wouldn't have expected that. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to start off with Tina. Tina, can you would you like to react to that poll? And from an employer's point of view, what is being done to improve working conditions for people in the gig economy?
Thank you, Aminda, for that. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to organizers for inviting us here. It's really interesting to see the poll. I'm as surprised as you are, Aminda, because 9 out of 10 people in the developing countries, they work in the private sector. And the private sector, as you know, is facing sustainability issues at the moment because of COVID. The ILC resolution that was adopted by member states, governments, workers, and employers last June also highlighted, they recognize that business continuity is an issue. And this is very much linked to what we have said. A lot of companies, we looked at the S&P 200 companies, the Fortune 500 companies. In the year 2000, their business cycle, the life cycle of a company was 85 years. But when you look at 2017, the life cycle of a business goes down very much so to 12 years. And this is before COVID. So a lot of businesses are going through a lot of sustainability challenges, and the lockdowns have not really helped. We've seen a lot, the tourist industry, the hospitality industry have pretty much shut down. So we really need to push to have this enabling environment for business to be more productive and more sustainable. So in case of the gig economy, we have seen there are a lot of opportunities, right? So there are a lot of opportunities there that SMEs, especially restaurants, have benefited from location-based platforms. When you look at those companies that have embraced digital transformation, they have managed to deliver their food to customers during the lockdown. Women are more likely to than men to perform professional services in digital labor platforms. We're seeing that this is a place where women can really showcase their talent. It enables them to be more flexible. It gives them the autonomy. And we did a policy paper on harnessing female talent in the digital economy, and we found that some women actually make more money than men in certain cases. So there are opportunities there. There's also opportunities for people to upskill themselves using the platform work. When you look at those competitive programming platforms, that they manage to learn new skills as they work. And it's not just a way to earn extra income for to supplement income that you have. We need to address the elephant in the room, and this is not mentioned enough. Half of the population, 40 to 50% of the world's population, do not have access to the internet. And this was mentioned in the UN Secretary General's report, which was released last Friday. As you know, in the Our Common Agenda report, 3.8 billion people do not have access to the internet. And really, we have to think beyond that. It's not just giving them access to the internet. We need to equip them with the digital skills, because they need to know how to use the internet and to harness the potential that it can bring. So are the schools equipped for that? So these are just my initial reactions to your question, Aminda. I'll give you back the floor.
Thank you very much indeed. Very interesting you talking about all these fantastic opportunities, and particularly opportunities for women. I think we may hear some other sides of that discussion in a moment, but what I would like to hear is from someone who's actually working in the gig economy. And I think it's really important that we hear from Saul. Before I turn to him, just a reminder to send in your questions to these panelists on this topic. And in Slido, you can vote on other people's questions too. So, Saul, as a delivery driver, what is your experience of the working conditions, and what is the aim of the group that you founded? And Jessica is going to give us the translation.
Muchas gracias. Antes que nada, a nombre de los hombres y mujeres que trabajamos en plataformas digitales y, bueno, o también han muerto tratando de llevar un pedido a su casa, a su domicilio, en nombre de las familias de estas y de nuestro colectivo, muchísimas gracias por tomarnos en cuenta y por escucharnos y plantear soluciones. La experiencia no es buena en México. En varios países tampoco, de los 5 continentes. ¿Por qué? ¿Quién paga por trabajar? ¿O quién trabaja por hobby? Esta respuesta la tenemos los repartidores o los trabajadores en plataformas en general.
I will translate what he said. First of all, I want to thank to the men and women who work on platforms, to the ones that have died working on these apps, to their families and the delivery workers that have been injured and amputee as well. And as well, to our collective Ni Un Repartidor Menos, thank you for considering us and listen to us to propose solutions. The experience in Mexico and in countries of all continents isn't good, because who pays in order to work? Who works as a hobby according to the apps? Sadly, we as delivery workers in applications that in another reality are not employees, we are partners, independent service providers, salaried users, partners with a voice or vote that can dare to tell the applications to recognize our labor rights, because they begin to fill up with excuses and threats of leaving. We are committed with a tripartite dialogue in accordance with the universal guarantees of work.
Thank you. That sounds most important, this dialogue with everybody, involving everyone, and making sure that workers' voices who have the experience on the ground actually get heard in that dialogue too on an equal level. I will come back to you in a moment, and now I would like to turn to Uma. I want to ask the findings on your latest report on digital platforms. Do they confirm what we've heard just now? What kind of important points does it raise about the informal and the gig economy in particular?
Thanks, Amanda, for the question, and I would also take the opportunity of thanking UNDESA and UNDP for actually inviting me for this important global policy dialogue on future of work. I think what Solo said very much resonates with what the findings from the report actually says. While I think one thing I'd like to set the tone for the discussion is that this notion that exists, that, whether one is talking about the taxi or the delivery platforms or online web-based platforms such as freelance or microtask, as though there are new jobs that are being created, this is not necessarily true, because all of these jobs actually existed in the traditional labor market. And what is happening is that you have technology in the name of platform companies coming in to mediate work of taxi or domestic worker platforms, or you have platforms on the online web which actually help you to outsource work which were normally internally done. The very fact that Amazon Mechanical Turk came about, it was basically to outsource the work that could have been internally done. So I think that contextualization is very, very important to keep in mind in having the going forward in this discussion. Well, it does provide opportunities now because many of these platforms have disrupted many of the traditional sectors, whether you're talking about taxi or the domestic worker or many other segments that you see. So they do help many workers to complement incomes that we have seen, but it has also become a main source of income for many of the platforms, and it has raised major challenges with regard to whether you're talking about regularity of work, incomes. You find that on average on the online web-based platforms, 50% of the workers earn $2.1 per hour, and the average income is about $3.4, nowhere close to any of the minimum wages that we actually talk about. The third issue that comes up is this huge occupational safety and health risks that are there, because many of these workers actually are working very long hours. And many of the accidents that you hear are as a result of the pressures that are coming, also because of the algorithmic management practices that they are being introduced in this form of work. And finally, the last to raise is that, and something that got quite exposed during the COVID-19 pandemic was the lack of social protection benefits for these workers, which actually exposed them, and many of them were at the risk. Many of us were in lockdown at our homes, getting food and other items being delivered. Who was delivering them? It was these delivery workers who had zero protection. And I think this raises fundamental questions with regard to the kind of platforms that have come. There is a sort of a commonality that exists with the informal economy, but the platforms further precarize these workers in the process. And I think that's very important to keep in mind.
Thank you. And in fact, I'd like to pick up on what you've just said there with Saul, because what was the effect of the pandemic on your work as a delivery driver? Were you under more pressure?
Ok. Seguimos expuestos, seguimos en las calles, no por gusto, las deudas, compromisos, impuestos, el hambre de nosotros y de los nuestros es lo que nos obliga a salir a las calles, a seguir trabajando. Acá en México, solo una aplicación quiso vernos la cara y fue Uber Eats, quien por darnos una mascarilla en un formulario de Google, en las letras chiquitas, bien dicen que en las letras chiquitas está el diablo, nos decía, al aceptar estos términos y condiciones, reconoces que tú, como repartidor o conductor de auto, no tienes ninguna relación laboral con nosotros, Uber, como empleador. De lo demás, hubo muchas aplicaciones que continúan y siguen repartiendo kits de seguridad. Nosotros nos unimos con la Secretaría de Seguridad Ciudadana, el ERUM, para repartir cubrebocas, gel antibacterial y sanitizar mochilas.
Okay, I will translate. We are really exposed. We are still in the streets not for pleasure. The debts, commitments, taxes, the hunger of us and ours has forced us to go out and take the risk here in Mexico. Only one application wanted to support us, but they end up trying to cheat on us. Uber Eats wanted us to accept in a Google form where in small letters said, accepting this form, you acknowledge that there is a type of employment relationship between you as a delivery person or worker and us, Uber. We denounced it in social media and Uber decided to don't give any support and they don't give any reimbursements that are up to 150 pesos, like 8 American dollars. The other applications provide us some support, and we as a collective, in collaboration with the Secretariat of Public Security and the Emergency Medical Rescue Squad, gave away alcohol gel, face masks, and we also sanitized backpacks.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you for that example. And in fact, I'd like to put that to Tina. Tina, from the employer's point of view, you gave us a nice rosy picture beforehand. Now we're seeing a little bit of the other side and the workers who are suffering because of some of the practices, the new employment practices that are coming on with the digital platforms and so on. What is your organization and your members? What are people doing to actually address some of these inequalities and pressures that are being put on workers, particularly when they're working with the digital platforms?
Thank you, Aminda. Just allow me to react to Sol and Uma there. First of all, I think naming companies, I think that's inappropriate in my opinion. So I hope we can respect not mentioning any companies in this discussion, because for me, it's more important to have a good relationship with the private sector. A good public-private cooperation is more important than ever. Naming and blaming is not really helpful in this situation. So if we want to work together on working on policies that are more robust, that are more realistic, more pragmatic, we really have to have this conversation, honest conversation, yes, but we also need to look forward on how we can proceed from this point onwards. Now, with regards to Uma, and she mentioned about this Westall report that was released, we believe that, and I have to say it, this is quite a misleading report, because it does not consult the platform companies properly, right? We do not hear their side of the story, and I think it's a little bit unfair. So we need to, you mentioned, Uma, on the algorithmic accountability. I'm just picking out just one of the few things that you mentioned. And this is, your report was proposing to go into accessing, the source codes. And this has a lot of implications on intellectual property rights, among other things. And so we need to have a more realistic approach, a more balanced approach. We have the technical meeting, as you know, Uma, in next year in 2022, the technical meeting of experts on the platform economy. And we look forward for a tripartite solution for that one, because we need the cooperation between employers, workers, and also governments in order to move forward, to have these sensitive conversations. So I totally agree with you. With social dialogue, we cannot emphasize enough the importance of social dialogue. And I mentioned this to Aminda a few days ago during our test, that it's really important to have the right people on the table. We need the trade unions, we need the employee organizations, and we need the governments to be on the table. And so as part of the solution, to answer your question about what are we doing with our members, we have been pushing for stronger, more sustainable social protection. We are pushing that as one of the key priorities at the ILO, with the Secretariat of the Employers Group at the ILO, as you know, and this is the house that produces international labor standards. We have said that, we need to have at least the basic level of protection, of social protection, the social protection floor as a minimum. We really believe that we should follow the recommendation of the ILO on social protection. The traditional model of assuming full-time work, full-time employment, lifetime contributions does no longer work. We all know the diverse work arrangements are on the rise. So we really need to really take a modern approach, a more smarter approach when it comes to policy. And we need to avoid, unreasonable pressures on SMEs, because SMEs, small medium enterprises, are the backbone of the economy. So we need to make sure there's a sound policy mix between sustainability, the fiscal space. By the way, we should also worry about the public debt that is being incurred by government, together with economic growth, and then balance that with significant coverage on the social protection side, and of course, ensuring human dignity and social justice, which is exactly what the ILO does. So I stop there, Amanda.
Okay, thank you. Uma, can I just get a quick reaction from you, please? And then we're going to go to some audience questions.
Sure. I just have a quick reaction to the point that was raised by Tine on the report, though I don't want to take it up beyond that. The report is not biased. It's very well balanced, number one, and it does take enough effort, more than enough effort, to go and talk to platform companies and to get their views. And this is very well documented in the report, and you can look at it. I think coming back to what can be done and what needs to be done, there are 2 points that I'd like to raise. I think with regard to social protection, I think there are countries around the world which have already started to use technology in a very effective way to provide social protection. And one such instance I can immediately is that of Uruguay, where ride-hailing drivers were required to actually register with both the social insurance and the tax contribution authorities through a very simple public phone application. And this actually led to ensuring that social insurance contributions were built into the mechanisms, and based on the amount of work that they had done, they were clearly getting social insurance. Similarly, there are very interesting examples that have come up, or experiments that have come up in Malaysia and Indonesia, where you have platform companies actually working with government institutions, social security institutions, in trying to ensure that workers have some sort of an insurance and protection with regard to it. With regard to what needs to be done, I think Tina very rightly mentioned the technical expert committee meeting coming up end of next year, 2022, where there is going to be a tripartite discussion with regard to what needs to be done to protect the workers. But our report actually goes about giving recommendations, not only in the field of labor law, but also including laws of algorithm, policies and laws related to algorithm and competition policy, and also talking about data and the need to actually broad-base the taxation if you need to ensure social protection for all. And it talks about a need for a social dialogue at the international level and international policy and coordination. The reason being that platforms operate multiple jurisdictions. Though countries have taken enough effort to address some of these problems at the country level, this is an international issue now, and that can be solved, or you can have regulatory solutions only through international policy and dialogue and coordination. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Uma. And now let's just go to a couple of quick audience questions on this. We have one from Tian Hui, which is, how is the UN going to be helping SMEs around the world to join building of a post-pandemic new normal and our future towards the SDGs? So that's one. And I'm also going to, obviously SMEs is quite an important topic that a number of people are asking questions on. But let's go to that one first, quick answers. So how will the UN be able to help SMEs to be part of all of this? We've already talked about the fact that they have difficulties. How can we help them? Who would like to talk? Agustina?
Sure, Aminda. Thanks so much. And I mentioned small, medium enterprises before. So I really appreciate that question because they are the very backbone of most of small economies, and not just developing economies. Even Switzerland, where I sit in Geneva, 90% of the enterprises are from small, medium enterprises. So we've been pushing and pushing for enabling environment for businesses to grow. We need to make sure that the policies and regulatory frameworks are flexible enough to make sure that the labor market works, making sure that skills is important because SMEs are really, they're doing everything. So skilling is important. We need to make sure that there's a skilled workforce where they can have access and tap into. So this culture of lifelong learning, which we've been talking about in the context of future of work, is really important because 2 out of 3 students who are in primary school today, by the time they enter the labor market, they'll be working in completely new industries. So that doesn't exist yet today. So we really need to make sure that we focus on at the education system, making sure that it provides students with the foundational skills, literacy skills, human social skills like critical thinking, creativity, problem solving. These are the kind of skills that we need to embrace. A lot of our members have been saying that a lot of this universities and the TVET system, they are 10 years behind industry. So we really need to make sure that there's no skills mismatch and skills gaps in between. Productivity is important to us because for SMEs, if they need to be sustainable, they need to be productive, because otherwise they go into that vicious cycle of this poverty trap that we've been talking about. If you produce less quality goods and services, then you make less income, and then you go back into this vicious cycle of this poverty trap, right? So we really need to make sure that there's this enabling environment for businesses to grow.
Okay, thank you. Uma?
Just 3 points that I thought would be very important for UN to address, and here I would also take ILO as one of the lead organizations with it. One thing that I can think of, and which has been promulgated in the past whenever we have had some sort of a crisis, is that of providing wage subsidies to many of the SMEs for a period of time till they are getting back into the track and can be sustained. The second thing that one can think about is the tax benefits that one can provide to many of these SMEs to ensure that they have enough resources to invest back into the SMEs to ensure that there is a continuity in the business. And the third thing that is very important is, which many of the SMEs actually suffer from, is access to credit and finance. And I think this is something that the UN as a body can sort of think about, how to ensure easy access to credit and financing at either lower interest rates or at a rate that is much more sustainable for many of these SMEs.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. We do have many other questions. I'm going to actually come to some of them a little bit later on because I now would like to move on to our next topic. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you all later when we come back to talk about the policies, more about the policies that are needed to support workers. And I'm sure, Saul, did you want to just very quickly, if you want to just one point, make a point now?
Sí, rápidamente con relación a lo que dijo Agustina, lo que menos queremos es hacer que alguien se moleste por filias y fobias, pero sí lo que tenemos que hacer es reconocer cuando las aplicaciones están haciendo mal las cosas, sobre todo en el peor momento que era la primera oleada del COVID acá en México. No se puede permitir que una aplicación, sea cual sea, quiera sacar una ventaja sobre los trabajadores, porque sin nosotros las aplicaciones no son nada.
He just wanted to point of what Agustina said, and we don't want to seem inappropriate to name applications, but it's necessary because it's happening, and it happened in the worst moment of the pandemic here in Mexico, and it's just not fair to having these apps and platforms taking advantage of workers, because without the workers, they are simply nothing, and we have to take account on these mistakes so we can look forward for this tripartite dialogue.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. A very important point, and I'm glad you managed to make that. Right, I'm now going to close this topic. Thank you, but we will be seeing our speakers later on. And I'm now going to move on to the role of AI, artificial intelligence, and automation. And in this section, we're going to be talking particularly about robots. To get the discussion going, let me launch a quick poll. And the poll is, are you concerned about AI and automation in the future of work? And I'm going to leave that poll for a moment. I've just voted as well. And we'll keep people, let people vote on that. And to start the discussion on this topic, I'm joined by Lindsay Sanneman from the Interactive Robotics Group at MIT. Her expertise is in robotics technology, and she's been serving on MIT Future of Work Task Force, which involved technologists, social scientists, economists, and robotics experts, among others. She's going to tell us a little bit about their work in a moment, but first let's close the poll and see the results. So we have about 51% of people saying that they are a little concerned about AI and automation, and quite a few saying that they're very concerned, 33%. So little concerned, very concerned. Before I go to Lindsay to get the reaction from those results, a quick reminder to share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag Future of the World, which is on the bottom of your screen. It's always there as a reminder. So Lindsay, let you join me. There you are. What do you think about those results? People are a little concerned. What do you think about that?
Sure. First of all, let me say thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here. Looking at those results, this is actually the exact question that the MIT Work of the Future Task Force set out to answer starting 3 years ago. And so we've been digging into this a lot. We visited a number of manufacturing firms, small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, which we've been talking about, as well as OEMs, and robotics manufacturers and research institutions. And what we really saw when we went out was that there was less adoption of technology and of robotics in particular than we really expected. We saw in all of our interviews that we performed, maybe 1 to 2 robots actually integrated on manufacturing lines. And where they were integrated, they were really doing great work and making jobs better. And so we started out with this question of, should we be concerned? We went out and saw that there are actually barriers to technology adoption. So I think a little concerned, that's where we started. And now we're asking questions of how can we actually make jobs better through technology? And how can we lower the barriers to adopting technology in order to make work better?
And what were some of the interesting findings? I know, for example, you went to Germany and there was something quite interesting that came out there.
Absolutely. So one major interesting finding was that where there were robots, they were really helping people. So for example, we saw one robot that was helping with, there was a task that workers previously had to do on this particular manufacturing line where one worker had to hoist a 40-pound object and another had to clean it. And this was ergonomically very bad for workers. And there was a lot of turnover in that position. People would get injured. And in that particular case, they actually replaced the hoisting job with a robot. And this freed up that worker to go do other value-added work. And people were not getting injured as much. And the robot was actually a great teammate in that case. So we started to look around at where else might this be possible in manufacturing? Where else could robots really help improve conditions for workers? So that was one really interesting finding that we had throughout our interviews.
And it's interesting you talk about the fact that robots can be beneficial. People are maybe slightly concerned about robots, but they can be beneficial because they can take over the hard jobs, the difficult jobs, the dangerous jobs, for example, like clearing contaminated sites, and they can free up people to do different work.
Absolutely. So in the future, we're seeing a shift really from people doing exactly as you said, those dull, dangerous, and dirty jobs, and shifting towards hopefully more creative work and more supervision-based work. And actually, one of the goals of our research in our lab is to look at how to actually make robots better teammates and leverage the relative strengths of humans and robots to do what neither can do alone and have a human-robot team. And so we're focused on collaborative robots in particular in this context. And what we really hope to do is look at what are robots strong at? What are robots good at? They're good at precision, speed, accuracy, things like that. And we're looking at what are people good at? People are good at adaptation, at creativity. So we're trying to apply robots to do some of those jobs that they're really good at so that people can be freed up to do the jobs that they're good at too.
Yes, interesting. I mean, I've seen a robot taking plates away in a restaurant, which was quite interesting, but I'm sure we're seeing more sophisticated ones than that coming up on the collaborative sphere. What barriers? We talked about SMEs earlier on, and of course, I can imagine for an SME, introducing a bot in their work would be very difficult. Have you come across any of the problems in that area?
Absolutely. So there are a number of barriers to adoption that we learned about, especially for SMEs that often have these high mix, low volume applications. So they're making very few of many different types of products. And we've seen that robots are not as applicable in those cases. And that's because as it is today, robots are not as flexible as we would like them to be, not as easy to use. And integration of robots into manufacturing lines takes a very long time, is very expensive. And so often SMEs do not have the financial or the time runway to actually integrate robots. And so what we took away from some of our interviews was we, as technologists, really need to make these robots easier to use, easier to program, so that SMEs can more easily integrate them and use them for manufacturing. And we hope to make robots actually easy to use by line workers as well, who deeply know the manufacturing tasks. I, as a roboticist, don't know much about the manufacturing tasks, but we want to enable the people who do to be able to more directly use the robots to help them.
Okay, yes. I mean, I suppose in tandem, there's also going to be lots of work to be done, maybe on the, I don't know, teaching humans how to interact with robots as well as robots interacting with humans.
Absolutely. So one thing that we saw that is critical right now, especially in SMEs, is robot programming capabilities. So in one particular company that we went to, the particular company was trying to actually integrate a robot onto their line to do a nickel plating application. This is one of these dangerous jobs. People were exposed to chemicals, but they didn't have the internal programming expertise in their company to actually get this robot up and running. So it took somebody 22 months to actually learn how to use the robot, get it set up, which a lot of companies just don't have the runway to do. So I think one really important thing that we need to be teaching people to do is program robots. And at the same time, we as technologists need to try to lower the barrier to use on the other side.
Okay, all right. Well, I've been checking the questions, and the ones that have got the top votes are certainly not about robotics at the moment. They're more about carbon-free economy and ensuring older workers are included in work-related policies. I'm just trying to go down the list and see if we can if I can find any on the. There's actually so many questions come in, which is great. Okay. I can't actually find one on robotics, which is quite interesting. Oh, hang on. Okay, there's something about artificial intelligence and job recruitment, which is not particularly your line of work, Lindsay, so I'm not going to put that to you. But could someone, one of our other panelists, maybe jump in and just answer that question? The question is, it was on the top of the screen and it's now disappeared, which was about AI. If you could put it back to the top of the screen, that would be great. It was about artificial intelligence in recruitment and how that could possibly increase inequalities. I don't know if any of our panelists would like to answer to that.
I wouldn't mind going for it.
Okay, yeah, so it was from Eric, and just a clearer thing on the question. With AI in place for job recruitments, persons with disabilities are more and more being left behind. How do we avoid that? And Eric is from Nairobi.
I think this is very true. I think there's more and more discrimination that is coming in with AI-enabled recruitment practices and strategies. And I think the reason behind that is much of this AI is dependent on vast amount of data that is actually collected. And if there is a bias that exists already in that data that gets further reproduced into this entire process of AI recruitment. So the only way to ensure that such discriminatory practices or unfair practices are not taking place is to have a human at the other end of the entire process to ensure that it is not only AI that is determining it, but there is a human in the loop which actually finally determines how the entire recruitment practice takes place. So there are limits or there are rules and procedures that need to be laid down to ensure that AI is not used for unfair recruitment processes.
Okay, thank you very much for answering that question and giving us your point of view. Right, I think at this point, since we don't have any other specific questions that have been voted on a lot on artificial intelligence and robotics, thank you, Lindsay. I'll bring you back a bit later as well when we're talking about policies. Maybe you can talk about the training side that we were discussing. And I'm now going to move on to our next topic, which is economic uncertainty. This is something that some of you may be experiencing in your world of work. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to launch a poll for this topic, please. Can we please launch the next poll? And here it is. And the poll is, should more be done to improve working conditions for people? So we'll keep that going. While I introduce our speakers for this topic, I'm joined by Elliot from UNDESA and Luis Felipe from UNDP. Please feel free to send in your questions on this topic and vote on them. And I'll try and go to the ones with the most votes first. I think a lot of the ones we have already waiting for us are actually very tied into this topic that we're going to be discussing now. So we already have quite a few. So now can we go back to our poll and can we close it and can I see the final results, please? Okay, and so you all think that a lot more should be done to improve working conditions for people. 90% of you roughly. So that's quite a lot of people saying that more must be done. So coming back to our speakers, Elliot, what's your reaction to those results? And can you give us a kind of short overview of some of the kinds of economic insecurity that we're seeing right now?
Well, thank you very much. I think I'd like to start off by pointing to the fact that for most people, the job represents the main source of economic security. And consequently, to the extent that the job is associated with some sort of uncertainty, that could be in itself a source of economic insecurity. Now, we've seen, and we had a lot of discussion earlier in the event, that the nature of work itself has been changing. We have these new types of jobs. In the gig economy, we have different types of temporary or part-time work, 0-hour contracts, subcontracted labor, and so on and so forth. And the key point here is that these jobs, although they give you more flexibility to the individual as to when and where work is done, they also are less structured and they're less regulated than formal jobs. And I think that is one particular source of uncertainty, is that one can't say for sure from one month to the next what the conditions of work are likely to be. And that's always going to be in the back of somebody's mind as a source of uncertainty, a source of economic insecurity. We've seen that there was growing job insecurity long before the pandemic broke out. And Tina referred to that. The nature of work itself has been changing very rapidly, and people have had to try to keep up. They've had to reskill. They've had to go out there to make themselves capable of staying abreast of these changing jobs. And then on top of that comes now the pandemic, which has essentially shut everything down. And as long as we don't yet have the universal vaccinations, we can't be sure that any given economy or any sector in the economy will be able to open up for business the way it was before, and we can't be sure that they won't be shut down again if there's a surge or some other outbreak. And for that, this is a source of fundamental insecurity and uncertainty that translates into economic insecurity. And I think that is something that governments have tried to address through the various response measures, through the stimulus packages that have been done. Many of them have aimed at preserving employment, for example, and preventing enterprise bankruptcy. But that doesn't address the more structural sources of insecurity that have been afflicting workers in the formal and the informal economy well before the pandemic broke out. I think a third thing that we have to think about as well is that this question of the constant change, the churning change that's happening in the nature of work is something that we are very ill prepared for. And so when the answer to the question doesn't really surprise me, when people say that we should be doing more on all sorts of different fronts, in preparing people for the changes in the job requirements, and that's a skills question to some extent, in providing people with support in the case they lose an income, be it temporarily or even permanently, and that's the social protection side. And thirdly, in just sort of trying to recreate the conditions for an economy to function after this pandemic, and that means getting on top of it and trying to control further outbreaks, and that means universal vaccination. Thank you.
Thank you. Luis Felipe, what are the key drivers of economic uncertainty that the UNDP is concerned about in the workplace?
Thank you very much, Aminda, and I briefly want to also thank Elliot Harris for the trust to partner in this very interesting initiative. So I want to start with a very general point, saying that we strongly believe that the future is not what it used to be, in the following sense. The future has always been very difficult to predict. But I think if we go 2 or 3 years ago, we could more or less predict what the prediction would be. So the variance of what can happen has increased. So it is more difficult to actually predict what predictions will look like. So in that sense, we're at sort of a second order level of uncertainty that's why we have to discuss these issues in this sense. First point. Second, when we talk about the future of work, we have to be a little bit more specific. So in a world in which capital and then the technology embedded in capital is relatively more mobile than labor, it really depends on the specific context in which you are discussing to understand this interaction. Okay, so let me give you as an example the region where I work, Latin America and the Caribbean. On average, 59% of workers in Latin America and the Caribbean work either as self-employed or in firms that have less than 5 workers. Only 18% work in firms that have more than 100 employees. Okay, so I argue, and you have seen this with clear evidence, and we presented this in our regional human development report that we presented recently. The size of the firm is correlated strongly with the capacity to absorb technology, but not only that, with the type of technology that you absorb. Okay, so in smaller firms, you tend to adopt technology that is actually more a complement of labor rather than a substitute. The example is all the delivery industry. Okay, In larger firms, technology tends to be more labor saving, and in that sense, more a substitute of labor. So that is why I think we have to nuance this conversation. Final point: the main issue, as always, in a context of increased uncertainty, is how to balance protection and flexibility. And the way we are proposing to address this is two elements. One, to delink social protection, basic social protection from the type of work that you have, and finance it through general taxes. So in a way, you provide everybody with a fundamental package, a basic package of social protection, completely delinked from the type of work that you have, and you finance it with general taxes. And in addition to that, you can have job-specific type of modules into that social protection, which is, of course, co-financed by firms and employees. And the second element for flexibility is invest massively in skills, on-the-job training, out-of-the-job training, skills for unemployment spells, and new skills for flexibility in schools and universities and technology institutes. So if we delink social protection from type of job and we invest in skills, we are trying to balance this notion of having people protected and at the same time investing in flexibility to adapt to that uncertainty that we cannot predict. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's go straight to some audience questions. We have quite a few on this, related to this topic. The one with the most votes at the moment is from Richard in Durham in the USA, and it says, can we ever get to a 4-day work week? I think there are questions on top of that, which is so that people can earn enough money, right, if they're working so less. I think that's quite important. We're talking about economic security. So that's one question. And I would also, I think we've been talking about inclusivity and the importance of skills and training. And Usa from Thailand asks, how do we ensure that older workers are included in work-related policies and programs? So I'd like to put those two questions to you, the 4-day week and the older workers. Who would like to start?
Well, I'll throw my hat in the ring on the 4-day work week. I think a lot of that is just a question of how we want to organize the work that's there. And let's not forget, it wasn't that long ago, the 6-day work week was the standard. You know, people did work on 1 day in the weekend, and that's been reduced. We had working times that were twice as long as what we have now. The 40-hour week is a relatively new accomplishment. The key point here, though, is that these agreements on how we want to organize our work were agreements that came about through the interplay between employers and employees, and the organizational representation of employees was a critical part of that. It's the social dialogue that the ILO talks about all the time. And that is where we will come to a consensus about how we want to organize the work that's there and the work that we anticipate will be there in the future. And a 4-day work week could be a part of that solution. We could also see people working not 4 days, but 5 days, but working less hours in a given day. We could see different forms of how we organize the time off, the time on work, and so on. But the key point here is that this will succeed if we have that dialogue between all of the concerned parties operating as sort of as equal participants in the dialogue, and that we understand what we're trying to do with it. And we're trying to optimize the situation for the humans who have to be the centerpiece of all of our attention. Thank you.
Exactly. It's interesting, though, that, I mean, we've been having these discussions for years and we're still having difficulty getting everyone on the table around together and discussing openly. It's quite interesting. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that a little bit more in the policy discussion as well. Luis Felipe, as far as the making sure that older workers are kept up and skilled up properly for the changes ahead, what do you think about that?
Yeah, just a brief point on what Elliot said. I think he's completely right. But just one point on that is, let's not forget that the change in the nature of jobs in terms of the workplace. The fact that we are all now working from home for those jobs that can be done from home what does it mean to work only certain days, or what does it mean how you enforce? What is the meaning of actually shortening? Actually, I can assure you that many people are working even longer hours. And the point here is for those that actually have to be in situ working. But the other point, as you said, we in UNDP have always proposed that digitalization can be an instrument for exclusion if we don't do it right. So all the issues of digitalization and technology require three conditions to be inclusive. One is, of course, the infrastructure. We need to connect people. We just heard how many people in the world are actually not even connected. So that's the first. But the second is we have to invest in skills for people to be able to use the technology. That cannot be underestimated. But the third is also regulation of technological firms, because otherwise all the efficiency gains are going to go to rents and massive rents for technology firms that control the networks and control the essential inputs in this market. So we need infrastructure, skills, and regulation for digitalization to be truly inclusive. And I would insist on the investment in skills, because we have not yet understood the huge loss of human capital for the world that this pandemic has implied. It's not only the years of schooling lost, it's the years of schooling it will take to recover those losses, but it's also the capacity of students, in many cases, to adapt to a new condition, to interact socially. There are also the soft skills that were lost. So the productivity lost through this pandemic is huge, and we should be really investing a lot and quickly on skills.
Thank you very much indeed, and I'm sure we'll be discussing that more in the topic that we're now going to start on. Thank you for discussing economic insecurity, and we're now going to move on to the topic about policies to support workers. And I would like to bring in all our speakers, because anyone can join in on this discussion, because it involves everybody, because it's a cross-cutting issue. To start this part off, let's have another quick poll. And this time, the question is, who should be involved in developing policies to ensure fair treatment in the workplace? So you have a number of options there, and I'm going to keep that voting open at the moment. And while we keep that open, just a reminder to also tweet your ideas and your comments and share what you've heard here using the hashtag Future of the World. I look forward to looking at all those tweets and social media comments later on. So I'm now going to close the poll. I know you didn't have long to answer, but since you're already in the swing, I think it's quite easy for you to vote. Can we close that, please? And it says, okay, well, not surprisingly, 77% said everyone has to be round the table. So it needs to be labour unions, government institutions, companies, representatives of vulnerable groups, and NGOs. And that ties into what we were just hearing about just now, the need for everybody to talk together. So if we get everyone back on the screen, I would just a quick fire ideas of what policies are required to ensure fair working conditions for people over the long term. Who would like to jump in on that one?
Well, I can, if I can just say that, reiterate what the two elements that I mentioned before. We firmly believe that, particularly in middle-income countries with very high levels of informality, we really need to rethink the interaction between protection and the type of jobs people have. We have to delink it. We need to have a universal social protection package that is not financed through the job that people have, so they can securely move across jobs. And second, we need to invest a lot in skills. If we do these two policies immediately, I think we can certainly help a lot workers, and we can give a boost to employment creation. That's the way we have been proposing.
Thank you. Uma? Your mic, you're muted. Unmute yourself.
Sorry, apologies. I would completely agree with what Lewis said, actually, that when we talk about workplace here, we have more informal workplaces of enterprises and not necessarily the informal workplaces. And I think that needs to be somehow addressed too. And there, very rightly, as you said, universal social upskilling and providing access, easy access to credit is fundamental for ensuring that, there's some sort of a fairness at workplace for them. Otherwise, when you're talking about a traditional workplace, the principles of equality, fair recruitment practices, fair treatment of employment or productive working environment, all of these are, or non-discrimination, all of these are basic labor principles that are already there. And, you do have collective agreements, and you do have, what is needed probably is that you need to reinvigorate the institutions of work so that they can offer adequate protection to all workers. That is both those are on contractual workers and those who are on regular work. And here, social dialogue, as very rightly mentioned by the poll, plays a very, very important role. And we have seen that countries where you have very strong institutions in terms of this, you do find that being very successful compared to others. But even in less settings, you do find that it is happening. But for the new forms of work that is coming up, it's a huge, huge challenge. And for that, you very clearly need first regulations in place. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now going to move on to a question which has been there at the top of the voting and every time, and is very important. And while it's not necessarily linked to what we've talked about, it's a policy, a very important thing, which is just move to my polls question now, what will be the impact of the transition to carbon-free energy on the workforce? And that's from Richard in Durham in USA. That's something that we've slightly touched on. Tina, you mentioned it a bit earlier, but what is the impact of that going to be?
Thanks, Aminda, and thank you very much for the question. So climate change is a really important topic, and we need to make these transitions work. So in order for us to move to clean technology and low carbon, we need to also look at the employment angle, which is, part of our mandate. So we need to make sure that, when we shift the economic structure to low carbon, we really need to create this conducive industrial policy frameworks. And we need to look at how companies address and how they behave when it comes to research and development. So with innovative regulatory frameworks, we can unlock the enterprise's potential, especially small and medium enterprises, and then they can adopt clean technology, low carbon production processes, and skills, which Louis was, rightly talking about. We really need to invest in skills, because a workforce that is transitioning from the usual way of doing business and then moving towards clean technologies, you really need to have the skills in order to do that. So we need to help those people move easily through investment in social protection and helping them, transition from one job to another, one region to another, and between occupations. So active labor market programs can also help on top of social protection.
Okay, anyone else want to come in on that for a moment?
If I may, just very briefly, we've done a lot of work in the UN on the green economy, and we've been collaborating very closely with the UNDP and with the ILO in something we call the Program of Action for the Green Economy page. Every single study I have seen in the last 10 years shows that the green economy, the low carbon green economy, is capable of generating a large amount of brand new jobs that are decent. In other words, yes, we will displace workers from the fossil fuel economies, but we're replacing the coal miner, which is one of the worst jobs I can imagine, with the installer of solar panels, which is a much safer, fundamentally much more healthy job. And these are jobs that have a future. Now, we talk an awful lot, and there's a lot of disinformation put out there about the cost in jobs of transitioning out of fossil fuels. And that is simply misinformation. because the number of people who are involved in the fossil fuel industry is actually relatively small compared to the amount of value generated, economic value, financial value generated in the industry. And it is clear by every measure that you can think of that in the clean and renewable energy sectors, the employment impact is going to be substantially larger, a multiple of the employment that could theoretically be lost in transitioning away from fossil fuels. It does require a certain amount of training, but the way I see it is you have to train a worker to go and work on an oil rig, or you can train a worker to go and do solar panel installations. It's a choice. But I think a lot can be done to facilitate that. And more to the point is that unlike the fossil fuel industry, which by its physical nature is highly concentrated, it is where the oil is, it is where the gas is. The renewable energy technologies that we have can be, for the most part, with a single exception perhaps of hydrology, they can be installed anywhere. And I think this is something that also should be taken into account when we talk about the employment consequences of the transition, is that it allows for much more flexible work, much more widely distributed geographically, and work that is fundamentally cleaner, safer, more decent. I think that's a no-brainer.
Okay, thanks, Elliot. We have a question that I think I would like to put to Saul. It's talking about measures to be put in place to address gender inequalities and inequalities in a gig economy. What can be put in place? And that's from Elaine in the Philippines. Saul, from your perspective, what are you fighting for? What are you putting in place for these safeguards?
Voy a hacer algo muy breve porque la traducción sí es un poco larga, entonces yo nada más voy a decir algo. Tenemos que construir propuestas claras y concisas entre gobiernos, trabajadores y aplicaciones. No podemos estar nadie fuera de estas mesas porque después se presta a las malas interpretaciones. Y un segundo punto, el próximo 1 de octubre saldremos los repartidores de los 5 continentes al 5º paro internacional de repartidores. La respuesta se las da más concreta.
I will translate some proposals that delivery workers have been working on. And it's about building solutions together. And we need to talk about us having a regulation where we can all have a voice and vote. We need to put effort at the negotiating tables where delivery workers, companies, and the government together work in a regulation that transforms this precarious model into a new tax model. And now our proposals to the governments are attachment to the universal labor guarantee, living salary enough to cover the basic needs of a family, time limit for the working day that allows us as the workers to recover and spend free time, and social security that protect us and our families with health services and clean and safe working conditions. Now our proposals to the acts are justice for our colleagues who died in road accidents or infected by COVID, and to arbitrary blockades and suspensions for the alleged violations of terms and conditions. The applications emerge with labor flexibility, and this should not be lost even when governments want to regulate. Simplification and respect for the work of our colleagues with hearing, mobility, or visual disabilities, as well as the elderly. Let me continue with a basic salary. From the moment the delivery person connects and fulfills the day, as well as the payment of overtime and payment of holidays in relation to the labor law of each country. Also, we propose the investment of the total charge for the use of the application in an insurance for major medical expenses, which protect us whether we are distributing or not. Last but not least, provision of work equipment, suitcase, raincoat, boots free of charge, and if not, permission to the delivery worker to work with what they have. And only one more point is that we want to announce that on October 1st, the 5th International Strike of Delivery Workers of Digital Platforms will be carried out through need us for action that is a worldwide alliance of delivery workers.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. We're almost coming to the end, but I just have one last question, which was sent in from Anonymous, which I want to ask Lindsay about, which is there potential for leapfrogging for developing countries in the field of automation? Is there a different way that they can introduce robots there? Do you see some potential for that, very briefly, Lindsay?
So I think that with the introduction of automation and robots, anybody really has the potential to really improve productivity in whatever manufacturing sector exists. I think one thing that's critical in developing countries or anywhere in the world really is centering the worker perspective that we've been talking about so much today. One thing that we saw is critical in the technology development process is actually integrating worker perspective from the design and development phase all the way through the integration and deployment phase, because it fundamentally, if workers don't trust the automation, if they feel their safety or livelihoods are at risk, then they won't trust it or adopt it. So I think one important thing, and what we've seen be most successful in some of the companies we visited, is really having the workers lead the process of technology development and design. And I think that is critical wherever automation is being introduced.
Okay, thank you. Right, well, I'm afraid the time has absolutely rushed by, and we're now coming to the wrap-up. Thank you for everyone for sending in your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't answer them all. We've been trying to make it more interactive with polls as well, and we'll try and make sure we get some more questions in for you next time as well. Thank you to all our speakers for their illuminating responses. And to wrap up, I'm going to say that this is almost the end of this first Global Policy Dialogue in the Future of the World series. We hope you've enjoyed it, and to find out, those of you watching in Zoom will be presented with a short survey when you log out. Please do take the time, just a couple of minutes, to fill it in. We're interested in your feedback. As you can see, we were listening from it last time when shaping these discussions today. A recording of this event will be archived on the UNDESA Facebook page at facebook.com/joinUNDESA. So if you want to rewatch it or share it with other people, it will be available as soon as we've finished today. And now you can also find more information on the Future of the World series of policy dialogues and policy briefs at un.org/DESA. Over the next 6 months, there will be discussions on the future of our planet, the future of money, aging, among other topics. To bring this session to a close, I'd like to thank the organisers from UNDESA and UNDP for bringing us together to discuss this important topic. Thank you to all our expert panellists for their stimulating interventions and ideas today. And finally, a big thanks to you, the audience, for your concentration, your active involvement in the polls, and for sending in so many questions. I do hope that you'll tune in again for the other global policy dialogues in this Future of the World series. And in the meantime, it's goodbye from me, Aminda Lee.